The restaurant in downtown Manhattan was the kind that made ordinary people feel small. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain. The air smelled faintly of white wine and wealth, and the laughter at each polished table was sharp, expensive, and proud. Behind one of those tables sat Charles Wentmore, a self-made millionaire who thought his bank account gave him the right to test anyone's worth. He was the type who loved making waiters squirm. People were toys to him, distractions in his daily performance of arrogance. Across the room, a young black waitress named Alina Brooks adjusted her apron and smiled through her exhaustion. She'd been on her feet since 9 a.m., serving guests who barely looked her in the eye. To them, she was just another server, polite, invisible, forgettable. But to her, this job was survival. She had dreams far bigger than this restaurant. Her shifts paid for night classes at a language institute, where she'd been working toward a secret goal, becoming an international interpreter for the United Nations. As fate would have it, she was assigned to table 14, Charles Wentmore's table. He was already half drunk on ego and champagne, surrounded by 2 investors and a social media influencer who laughed at every cruel joke. When Alina approached, pad in hand, Charles leaned back, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Well, look who we have here," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I'll bet she doesn't even understand what I'm saying." His friends chuckled. Alina, used to this kind of behavior, simply smiled. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you tonight?" He grinned wider. "Oh, we're going to play a game." He pulled a crisp stack of bills from his wallet, $100,000. The bills looked unreal under the light. "If you can take my order in Chinese, this is yours." His friends burst into laughter. "She probably doesn't even know how to say hello in English properly." One of them snorted. Alina stood there quietly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes. She didn't flinch, didn't protest. She simply took a deep breath, looked straight at him, and spoke. Her voice smooth, calm, and perfectly fluent. "Qing wen nin yao he dian shima." "What would you like to drink?" The entire table froze. The influencer's glass nearly slipped from her hand. Charles blinked, confused, as if the air had suddenly turned solid around him. "What did you just say?" He stammered. Alina repeated it, this time switching into Mandarin with native precision, her tone rising and falling with melodic accuracy. She didn't stop there, she added politely. 我们今天有法国红酒、美国牛排，还有刚出炉的面包. Today we have French red wine, American steak, and freshly baked bread. The laughter stopped completely. Even nearby diners began to look their way. Charles's jaw dropped. "Wait, you actually speak Chinese?" Alina's smile deepened. "Mandarin, Cantonese, and Shanghainese," she said softly. "Would you prefer the order in one of those?" His friends were whispering now, half in awe, half in embarrassment. One of them tried to laugh it off. "Man, you just got roasted!" But Charles didn't find it funny anymore. Trying to recover, he leaned forward. "Okay, fine, you rehearsed that. Impressive trick. But let's see how far it goes. Can you take the whole order in Japanese?" Alina didn't blink. "Hai dozu. Gochumon wa nan desu ka?" "Yes, of course. What would you like to order?" The sound of her Japanese was crisp, natural, even elegant. Someone from another table murmured, "Is she multilingual?" Charles's pride began to crumble. He was used to being the smartest man in the room, the one with the last laugh. But this young woman, this waitress, had just turned his mockery into his humiliation. He could feel his cheeks flush red, a heat rising under his collar. "All right," he muttered, "you're good. Maybe you practiced those." Alina tilted her head. "Would you like me to explain the specials in Russian, French, or Arabic?" "Because I can." The room fell silent again. "You're bluffing." "Anta muta'akkidun min dhalik?" "Are you sure about that?" She replied smoothly, her voice rich with the rhythm of Arabic. The man beside Charles, one of the investors, dropped his fork. That's real Arabic, man. I worked in Dubai. That's not fake." Charles sank back in his chair, defeated, but his ego refused to let go. "So what?" he snapped. "You're still just a waitress. All the languages in the world won't change that." That was when Alina's smile faded, replaced by a quiet dignity. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but I use what I know to serve people, not to humiliate them." The table was silent. Charles looked away. For the first time, the millionaire who thought he could buy respect realized how cheap his arrogance looked under the glow of truth. As Alina walked away, whispers followed her through the restaurant. The chef came out from the kitchen pretending to need something, just to see the woman who had humbled a millionaire without raising her voice. But none of them knew her full story. The years of loss, the sleepless nights, and the secret opportunity that was about to change everything. Because that night, as she finished her shift, someone else had been watching her, quietly from a corner booth. A man in a tailored gray suit, older, calm, and powerful. When Alina delivered his bill, he didn't hand her money. He handed her a card. "Come see me tomorrow morning," he said. "Your talent shouldn't be wasted here." And that was the moment everything changed. Alina barely slept that night. The image of that mysterious man in the gray suit lingered in her mind, long after she hung up her apron. His card, embossed in silver, lay on her kitchen counter under the flickering light of her small apartment. It read, Ambrose International, Cultural and Diplomatic Consulting. Samuel Ambrose, founder. She'd heard of him. Everyone in the language circles had. Samuel Ambrose wasn't just rich. He was powerful in quiet, world-shifting ways. Governments hired his firm to translate and negotiate billion-dollar deals. If he'd noticed her, it wasn't by chance. Still, doubt haunted her. People had promised her opportunities before. Most turned out to be scams or empty words meant to sound generous. But something about Ambrose's calm gaze told her this was different. The next morning, Alina arrived at his office, a towering glass building overlooking the Hudson. She wore her one clean blazer and held her resume in shaking hands. Inside, the receptionist greeted her by name, as though they'd been expecting her for weeks. "Mr. Ambrose will see you now," she said with a knowing smile. When she stepped into his office, he was standing by the window, sipping coffee. "Miss Brooks," he said, turning to face her, "you have an extraordinary gift." She blinked. "Sir, I just speak a few languages," he smiled. 9 fluently. 10 if we include your sign language certifications. Her heart skipped. How did he know that? "I did my research," he said, answering her unspoken question. "People don't just pick up that many languages. They earn them through pain, persistence, and purpose. You remind me of myself when I started." Alina hesitated. "Why were you at the restaurant?" "I was meeting with a potential client," Ambrose replied, sitting down. "But then I saw what you did to that pompous millionaire. What you didn't do, rather. You didn't humiliate him. You showed him grace while destroying his ego. That's rare. I like that." He slid a document across the table. "A contract. I'm offering you a position in my firm. Interpreter, 6-figure salary. International travel. You'd start next week," Alina froze. This is real?" "It's real," Ambrose said. "But understand this, my company doesn't just translate words. We read between them. You'd be working with diplomats, investors, and some very dangerous people who hide their motives behind politeness." A chill went down her spine. "Dangerous?" Ambrose smiled faintly. "Every language hides a weapon, Miss Brooks. I just need someone who knows how to disarm it." She stared at the papers. Everything she dreamed of was suddenly in front of her. But part of her couldn't forget that night at the restaurant, the way Charles Wentmore had looked at her, the humiliation he'd tried to inflict. She wondered if she'd ever truly escape people like him. Ambrose interrupted her thoughts. "I'll give you time to think. But if you're in, report to our Manhattan office Monday morning." Alina signed before she could stop herself. "I'm in." 2 weeks later, Alina found herself in Geneva, standing in front of marble columns and foreign flags. She was now officially working for Ambrose International. The training was grueling. Daily language drills, security protocols, psychological assessments. But she was thriving. Her first assignment was a confidential meeting between Ambrose's client and a foreign investment group. She was there to translate Mandarin, but within minutes she realized something was off. The client was none other than Charles Wentmore, the same man who had offered her $100K as a joke. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. But when he did, the look on his face was unforgettable. His arrogance melted into disbelief. "Wait, you," he whispered as she adjusted her headset. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wentmore," she said evenly, not a trace of emotion in her tone. "Shall we begin?" He leaned forward, jaw tight. "You work for Ambrose?" I do, she said. And today, I'll be interpreting for your $500 million deal with the Shanghai investors. Charles glanced nervously at the suits across the table. The Chinese delegation was already seated, waiting. He couldn't risk showing weakness. As the meeting began, Alina translated every word flawlessly. English to Mandarin, Mandarin to English. But what Charles didn't realize was that his own arrogance was sabotaging him again. He'd spent weeks preparing for this negotiation, but his tone, dismissive, superior, and impatient, was alienating the investors. Halfway through, one of the delegates made a subtle joke in Mandarin, calling him a man with money but no manners. The others chuckled softly. Charles had no idea what they said, but Alina did. And this time, she didn't protect him. When he tried to press for a deal clause that would benefit him unfairly, the lead investor turned to Alina and said something quietly. She translated truthfully. "We decline to work with partners who do not respect cultural integrity." Charles went pale. "Wait, what? What did I do wrong?" Alina looked him dead in the eye. "Sometimes it's not what you say, Mr. Wentmore. It's how you say it." The investor stood, shook hands with Ambrose, and walked out. The deal was over. Charles collapsed back into his chair, defeated. Ambrose, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. "Mr. Wentmore, I think we're done here. Perhaps next time you'll treat your servers and translators with a bit more respect." Charles looked at Alina, realization dawning on his face. You set this up?" She shook her head. "No, you did. I just translated." And as she turned to leave the room, the man who once mocked her for her skin and her service was left alone, a millionaire undone by his own arrogance. But little did Alina know, her victory came with a price. Because the deal she just ruined was tied to people who didn't take failure lightly, and someone was now watching her very closely. To be continued in Part 3, where Alina discovers that her gift for languages has placed her in a world more dangerous and more powerful than she ever imagined. The night after the failed deal, the city lights of Geneva shimmered across Lake Léman. But for Alina, the reflection in the window felt heavy with unease. Her triumph over Charles Wentmore had gone viral inside the company, whispered about in conference halls, admired by some, resented by others. But it wasn't admiration that woke her at 3 a.m. that night. It was fear. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. When she answered, a low voice spoke in Mandarin, smooth but menacing. "You cost us $100 million. Be careful what you translate next time." The line went dead. Her heart pounded. Who were they? How did they get her number? She tried calling Ambrose, but there was no answer. Instead, she got a text. "Stay calm. Meet me at the office tomorrow morning. Don't tell anyone." Morning came like fog, thick with dread. Alina arrived early, but Ambrose's office was dark. His assistant looked shaken. "He left for Zurich last night. Didn't say why." That was strange. Ambrose never disappeared. Hours later, an envelope appeared on her desk. No name, no sender. Just her name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a single photo, her leaving her apartment, taken from across the street. Alina felt the blood drain from her face. Whoever these people were, they weren't bluffing. And somewhere between fear and fury, she made a decision. She wouldn't be a victim again. That night, she pulled out her old laptop and began to trace every file connected to the Shanghai investors. Her linguistic training helped. She could read through contracts and internal communications in multiple languages, decoding meaning others would miss. And what she found made her sick. Charles Wentmore's deal hadn't just been about property investments. It was a cover. The investors were fronting for an international laundering operation using shell companies across Asia and Africa. Ambrose's firm had been hired to mediate, but he'd discovered the truth and was quietly helping authorities build a case. That's why he had vanished. Alina realized too late that she'd walked into something far more dangerous than business. And by embarrassing Wentmore publicly, she had exposed herself as a liability. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number, a text. "We can make this go away. Meet us. No police. Attached was a location, an abandoned warehouse near the outskirts of Geneva. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. Then she whispered to herself, "They chose the wrong woman to threaten." The night was cold and quiet when she arrived. The warehouse was lit only by the flicker of a dying bulb. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing off metal walls. "Alina Brooks," a voice called from the shadows. Charles Wentmore stepped out looking different, shaken, sleepless. "You shouldn't have come. You sent the threats?" she demanded. He shook his head. "No. They're after me too. Those investors, they weren't businessmen. They were laundering money for a private network. When the deal collapsed, they blamed me. I thought you were working for them." Before she could respond, the sound of tires screeched outside. Several dark SUVs pulled up, headlights cutting through the cracks of the warehouse doors. Charles's eyes widened. "They're here!" Without thinking, Alina grabbed his arm. "Follow me!" She led him through a back door and into a maze of shipping containers behind the building. The men shouted orders in Mandarin and Russian. She understood every word. "They said go left," she whispered. "We go right." They ran, breathless, slipping behind rusted crates. The night was alive with danger, footsteps, flashlights, shouting voices. Every word of their pursuers became a map in Alina's mind. When they reached a dead end, Charles panicked. "We're trapped." Alina crouched behind a container, thinking fast. Her eyes darted to a cargo truck parked nearby, engine still warm. "Get in." They climbed inside and ducked low. Alina scanned the dashboard, keys still in ignition. "Guess luck likes me tonight," she muttered, turning it on. The truck roared to life, drawing attention. Shouts erupted. "Taze Nali!" "She's there." Alina slammed the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, smashing through the warehouse gate. Bullets pinged off the metal sides, glass shattered, but she didn't stop. Her heart was a storm, her hands steady as stone. They drove until the city lights returned, until the danger faded behind them. When she finally pulled over near the airport, both sat in silence, breathing hard. Charles stared at her, awe replacing arrogance. "You just saved my life." She gave him a cold glance. "Consider us even." He swallowed. "Alina, I don't know how to fix what I did. I was an idiot. Worse than that. You didn't deserve what I said or what I made you feel." She looked out the window. "You didn't just mock me, Charles. You mocked every person who's ever had to prove they belong." He lowered his head. "You were right, and you taught me something I should have learned long ago. Intelligence has no color and kindness has no price." She sighed, her anger softening just slightly. "Then use your money to fix something real, not your ego." As dawn broke, Ambrose called. His voice was firm but relieved. "You did well, Miss Brooks. We know everything now. The authorities will take it from here. You're safe." Safe. The word felt almost unreal. A month later, Alina stood, in the same restaurant where it had all begun. This time, not as a waitress, but as a guest of honor. Her story had reached headlines. Waitress exposes $1 million scam using 9 languages. Ambrose International promoted her to lead interpreter. And Charles Wentmore? He'd donated half his wealth to a foundation supporting underprivileged language students, one named after her late mother, the Brooks Initiative for Equal Opportunity. When Alina stepped up to speak at the ceremony, her voice trembled, not from fear, but pride. "I used to think language was just about words," she said, "but it's more than that. It's how we see each other, how we bridge what divides us. I learned that the real translation we all need isn't between languages, it's between hearts." The audience stood, applauding. Cameras flashed, and somewhere in the back, Samuel Ambrose smiled quietly. He had found not just an interpreter, but a voice that could change the world.